Amen. Thanks, Brother Gary. We're still in Ecclesiastes, chapter 8, and we're ready to start verse 9. Ecclesiastes chapter 8, starting with verse 9. Verses 9 through 13 deal with things that cause uncertainty, worry, and anxiety. And they're summed up in the last part of verse 12 and the first part of 13. So let's look at those verses, those 5 verses together right now. Starting with verse 9. All this have I seen, and applied my heart unto every work that is done under the sun. There is a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt. And so I saw the wicked buried, who had come and gone from the place of the holy, and they were forgotten in the city where they had so done. This is also vanity, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Though a sinner do evil 100 times, and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God, which fear before him. But it shall not be well with the wicked, neither shall he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he feareth not before God. Several things are contained in these 5 verses, and you see a little glimpse of Solomon's, I like to call it his return to God. Quite often in these chapters we've been studying, Solomon gets real pessimistic. And we've attributed some of that to the time in his life when he left God, as he was influenced in a wrong way by so many of the women that surrounded him, his wives and concubines, and him paying attention to, especially these of foreign extraction, who brought in false gods and things like that to the palace. And he paid attention to them when he shouldn't have. Well, he shouldn't have been doing all that in the first place, but then he paid attention to these foreign women that he brought in. And it took him away from God. And so there's a period of time that he departed from God, and I think most scholars think that he came back in the later part of his life. And we do see in the book of Ecclesiastes, although there's a lot of pessimism in the book, toward the end, you see him coming back to the conclusion that he makes at the end of chapter 12. And as we started this study, we jumped there first. It's kind of like reading the ending of the mystery novel before you start reading chapter 1. Because at the very end, he says, after I've looked at all of these things, I've come to the conclusion that man's whole duty is to fear God and keep his commandments. Well, you know, a reprobate isn't going to be giving those kind of instructions to people, is he? He's going to continue in his reprobateness, or whatever you would call it, is sinning against God and not encouraging people to follow God, which he does at the end. And in these passages, you see a little glimpse of that he is giving us some advice with respect to how we live our lives, and that is in accordance with God's commandments and not doing all the evil things that you have a chance to do in this life. Verse 9, all this have I seen and applied my heart into every work that's done under the sun. There's a time wherein one man ruleth over another to his own hurt. He's seen a lot during his life. He's seen how people get treated. Especially in Proverbs, we see Solomon teaching us not to abuse the poor. You know, the poor have enough problems in their lives without people adding to it. And you know, when you get right down to it, what can you take away from a poor person? He has very little. But it seems like people like to heap more problems upon the poor people. And he cautions us against that a lot in Proverbs and a little bit here. He talks in verse 10 about how that he's seen the wicked people buried, and people then forget about them after they go. Although a lot of times we remember evil people. But on the other hand, if I ask if you could name me a poor person in the Bible, most of you could, because Lazarus was a poor person, right? What was the rich guy's name that Lazarus laid at his gate and just wanted the crumbs that fell from his table? Not named, is he? Okay? Now we remember him because of his behavior, and we remember he was rich, but we remember what happened to him too, but we don't know his name. So there's a lot of evil people in the world that are forgotten after they're gone. Few of them remain, but then we see the end that they came to. You look at none of us were alive during World War II, but we've read the history. And there were some very, very powerful men that got the world enveloped in probably the worst war that's ever hit this earth. We do remember their names, but we also remember what happened to them. Adolf Hitler committed suicide right before the Russians took Berlin. Mussolini was captured and hung, and his body, along with his mistress, were left hanging for days in the street where he died. Joseph Stalin helped start the war, but he switched sides, not of his own choosing. Adolf Hitler chose that for him when he invaded, I think it was on June 22nd of 1941, when Germany turned on their initial ally and invaded Russia. And so Joseph Stalin went from the bad guys to the good guys overnight. He ended up, he didn't suffer the type of death that Mussolini and Hitler did. I think he died of a stroke or a heart attack or something like that in the 50s, if I remember. And we remember their names. All three of those men were very evil. And we do remember their days, but look at what they basically came to. And have you seen a kid running around with the name Stalin or Hitler or Adolf? You might see a few Adolfs. I think Adolf is a name that Germans will still give out, but those names, just like Judas. You run into too many people named Judas. Those names, even though we remember them, they're not valued. They're not praised because of the evil that they did. So, a lot of times, and Solomon tells us this, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later in this lesson, is that, wicked people seem to be doing okay. We sing a song about, why do these people prosper, living so wicked year after year? I think are the words from the song. I think it's Tempted and Tried. It's the name of the song. And it seems like sometimes the wicked people prosper. But the thing that we need to keep in mind is whether they prosper or not, will they prosper in judgment? No. What happened to the rich man? At the day of his death, he probably thought things were going pretty good. And then he lifted up his eyes in torment. And so, we're going to talk a little bit before we get to the end of this lesson, now or 6 months from now, that in the end, the righteous people will overcome. And that's a great story of Revelation. A lot of times Revelation gets confusing, but the main theme of Revelation is God's people will overcome. And so we will. Verse 11 talks about, verse 11 is very interesting. It says, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them that do evil. This is an argument that we see today. Justice isn't fast. You know, a lot of times we'll read, I was going to say read the paper. I don't get the paper anymore. Now we read online a lot when we look at news. But we see well, somebody's finally executed for a murder they committed 35 years ago. Been on death row for 35 years.
What's the adage? Justice delayed is justice denied.
Yeah, good point. If you didn't hear what Randy said, there's an old adage that justice delayed is justice denied. A lot of sociologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, and other folks that study human behavior will say that punishment of evildoers has no deterrent factor. And that may be true. On the other hand, I don't know if you're familiar with the word recidivism, I think is how it's pronounced. What that means is doing crimes over and over again. Well, punishment does have an effect on that, doesn't it? If you're a murderer and you go to the electric chair, do you commit another murder? You don't, do you? You know, I'll see on the news and things how we're deporting someone who's been accused or convicted of, it seems like hundreds of offenses, hundreds of crimes. And you wonder, why aren't they in jail? Not necessarily talking about the death penalty, but why aren't they in jail? Why are they still out on the streets hurting people? They go in front of a judge and they turn them loose. And 6 months later they're back for the same crime. I think that fellow that killed that Ukrainian immigrant, I think it was in North Carolina, on a train, slashed her throat, almost decapitated her, had been in and out of the justice system and was out roaming the streets. Well, Solomon wrote, we think, about 3,000 years ago, roughly, and he was saying the same thing. If you don't speedily take justice, you're going to have problems. People aren't going to be discouraged from committing crimes. If you think crime pays, my personal opinion is, I think it leads to more crime. If crime doesn't pay, I think at least people have second thoughts before they commit crimes. Now, that doesn't always affect, like crimes of passion and things like that. But people that set out to do crimes will at least think twice if they know if they get caught, they're going to be punished very quickly. But Solomon was complaining about it 3,000 years ago. And so human nature hasn't changed very much. Suzette?
On the flip side of that, like these murderers that get out or are incarcerated,
Mm-hmm.
The family of that person that was murdered, it doesn't end for them because they have to keep going to their parole hearing and all that stuff. So they're constantly reliving that as well.
Right. And so it creates even additional problems, Yeah. So there's no easy answers, and society's been dealing with it for years. But Solomon points it out. And I think what Kaufman did with respect to this verse is he quoted from the Anchor Bible. And here's how they translated the verse. Because the sentence for wrongdoing is not quickly executed, that is why men's minds are filled with thoughts of doing evil. So that's another translation that puts it in a little bit more modern English. Okay, but I think when you look at 12 and 13, it sums up how we should be thinking and why we shouldn't worry and be anxious about these things. Okay? Verse 12, though a sinner do evil 100 times and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it shall be well with them that fear God, which fear before him. But it shall not be well with the wicked, neither shall he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he feareth not before God. Okay? And we're going to, in verse 14, we're going to talk about how there's a general rule for the way people should behave and what will result if they do or they do not. But there will be exceptions. And this one kind of at least hints at those exceptions, and then it's really laid out in verse 14. But what Solomon is saying, and I think this tells me at least that he's kind of, either he's written a lot of this stuff when he's thinking back about his rebellious days against God, or he may still be in some of those rebellious days. But then we start seeing these glimpses of where he's basically given us the straight scoop here, okay? And that's what he does here in 12 and 13. Okay, and so in verse 12, he uses the phrase, though a sinner do evil 100 times, or let's suppose he lives 100 years, will he reap the benefit of his evil work? And what I mean from that is if he gets anything good out of his evil work, will he reap that benefit? Well, he may on this life. You know, if he steals, you know, he robs a bank and gets $10 million somehow, he may be able to spend it. He may be able to live his life, stay away from the cops, not be brought before the halls of justice for what he did, and spend all that money and enjoy it. But what happens in judgment? He will get his just deserts, right? Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. And the same thing's true about the good person. You know, suppose the good person doesn't enjoy the fruits of this life. When he dies and goes to judgment, it'll all be forgotten. Will not make a bit of difference. And so the evil man that stands before God and his bank account had $100 million in it is not going to help him a bit. And the poor person that died penniless, but who served God during his life, is going to have blessings beyond imagination. So, verse 14 is going to help us to understand that. Let's go ahead and read it. There is a vanity which is done upon the earth, that there be just men. There be just men. Okay, and what that means is we're talking about good men, not just men. Okay, but good men, unto whom it happeneth according to the work of the wicked. Again, there be wicked men to whom it happeneth according to the work of the righteous. I said that this is also vanity. So what verse 14 is talking about here are exceptions to the general rule. The general rule is that if you obey God and do his work, you'll be blessed. And that's true. But that doesn't mean that you'll never have problems. Bad things happen to good people. And we got people sitting in this audience this morning that'll say that's true. I think most of you will, because some of you have experienced it, right? Some of you have experienced. Why did that happen to me? Charles?
You just talked about a good example of that in the last chapter, Job.
And you know, Job kind of had those thoughts, didn't he? Why is this happening to me? How about King Hezekiah? Okay, the prophet told King Hezekiah he was going to die. He was sick, and the prophet told him he was going to die. And he prayed to God, and he said, in essence, this is the Rick McCormick version of it, I've been doing everything you wanted me to do. I've been a good king. I followed your precepts. Why is this happening to me? God gave him 15 more years. Now, we also talked about, I think it wasn't Manasseh, who was one of the most evil kings that ever existed, and he ruled for 55 years. God didn't take him out. And so we do have exceptions to the rule. But the basic rule is, if you follow God and obey his commandments, you'll be blessed in this life. And you know, at the end of Proverbs, I have a little paragraph in my notes, and I repeat it every now and then. If we live for God, and we work hard, and we're good stewards of what we have, we'll be blessed in this life and in the life to come. If we do the opposite, we may end up as paupers, you know, poor as a church mouse because we've blown everything, and then not have eternal life. Now, will there be exceptions? Yeah, good. There will be good people who die penniless, and there will be evil people who die rich. And those are the exceptions to the general rule. And part of the general rule is because when God created man, he created him as a free moral agent. He didn't make him into a robot, a programmed robot. He gave him the ability to choose. And the sad thing is, a lot of times, men, and I'm using men in a generic sense here, choose wrongly, unwisely. You know, if it was such that every Christian was blessed monetarily on this earth beyond imagination, you would be a fool not to be a Christian, right? If the people of the world look and saw, you know, the people that live for God, they just get blessings showered on them every day. What am I out here doing serving Satan? Satan's not doing anything for me. All right? Well, the buildings would be full. We'd have to build new buildings to take care of the influx. God doesn't want that. He wants us to serve him because we love him. Okay? Now, at the end of time, yeah, it's going to be that. People who are lost are going to look at the Christians and say, wow, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I live for the Lord? Look at the blessings they're going to have. Could the rich man see Lazarus up there? Yeah. The Bible says he saw Lazarus in Abraham's bosom. And he was probably sitting there thinking, you know, I had it pretty good in my life. I remember old Lazarus. He was that piece of trash that used to lay outside my gate and cause me problems. Would the rich man have traded places with Lazarus after death? In a heartbeat, wouldn't he?
It's compound punishment.
It is compound punishment. Not only are you in torment, but you're looking at what you missed. And that kind of doubles it, doesn't it? It's bad enough to be in torment, but to think that if you just paid attention to Lazarus and had the same attitude that Lazarus had, you'd be up there. Oh, we always kind of think up there's heaven and down there's hell, right? That's kind of the way we picture it. But we'd be up there with Lazarus instead of down here with Satan and all these mean people. You know, the worst thing about hell is the type of people you'd be associated with. All the evil people that ever lived are going to be there. That's awful to think of. You know, look at the blessings we have in the association we have with each other. You know, if we need help, you're there. Or should be anyway. Now, do we always do what we should do? No. We stumble and fall. We're human. But the relationships we have with each other is just a faint picture of what we'll have in heaven. And Solomon is kind of hinting at that. You know, at the end of Ecclesiastes, Solomon makes that conclusion and gives it to us. That our whole duty is to fear God and keep his commandments. And we'll be blessed for it. And we'll be blessed on this earth for it. Okay, any comments down through verse 14? Okay, let's look at verse 15. If I stumble a little bit up here, it's because I'm too close to my notes to see really good with my distance vision, and I'm too far away from my notes to see real good with my readers. And so I've got it printed in a bigger font, but sometimes it's a little fuzzy for me. But here,
14,
huh?
14,
What about 14?
font.
Oh, font. Okay. I didn't hear what, yeah, I got it in 14 font.
Okay, so I thought.
Yeah, I got it in 14 font. So verse 15 says, Then I commended mirth, because a man hath no better thing under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be merry. For that shall abide with him of his labor the days of his life, which God giveth him under the sun. Now, we know that God dropped manna out of heaven for the Israelites, right? Now, does he literally drop manna out of heaven to us? No, he doesn't. Okay? So how do we have things to eat, drink, and be merry? Again, does God drop all that stuff out of the sky to us? No, we work for it, right? We work for it. So this gets back to what I say about, we work hard. We be good stewards of what we have. And God takes care of us through that, doesn't he? God expects us to do our part. And then he'll do what we can't do. There are people who look at the Bible and they see the miraculous healing that went on. And they think that they can pray to God and he'll just heal any problem that you've got. Now, the way I view that, and again, this is just Rick McCormick's opinion, but the way I view that is God expects us to do what we can do. And then he'll step in. Okay? So if you cut your hand and it's bleeding badly, are you going to stand there and pray for God to stop that bleeding? Or are you going to go to the ER and have him sew you up? I know what y'all going to do. You're going to go to the ER. Or urgent care in case it doesn't charge as big a copay as the ER does. Okay? I mean, we're going to go get some medical help. If we've cut an artery and it's gushing blood, I don't think any of us are going to pray to God to stop that fountain in our arm. But if the doctors say we've done all we can do, I'm going to pray to God anyway, but I'll really pray to God then. That maybe he's not finished with me on this earth yet. I told you all about the person we had at Boomer, church would have been hard pressed to do without him. And he had a heart attack, and we prayed and prayed and prayed, and he recovered and lived several more years. And then when he did die, the church was stronger and was able to survive his departure. So, I truly believe that God, of course, is part of his plan, and we don't understand all his plan. But I think he does look after us. We're all going to die. If Jesus doesn't come back in our lifetime, we're all going to die. We hate to admit it, but isn't it true? Isn't it true? We're not going to get out of this world alive unless Jesus comes. And Jesus hasn't come for 2,000 years. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to be here tomorrow or later today. But he may delay another 2,000 years, although I don't think he will. But we do know he's closer to coming than he's ever been before, right? And that's the only way we'll get out of this world alive, is if Jesus comes back in our lifetimes. Other than that, we're going to pass from this world. Now, let me try to say this in a way that doesn't hurt anybody. I just won't say it. But like I said about that person at Boomer, I think the Boomer congregation would have had a hard time holding on if he had died with that first heart attack. And so, but we just can't pray for God to keep us living. Because, the inevitable will happen. But I think we ought to be praying that, to help us weather whatever comes. And what that tells me, what I told you about the guy Boomer, is that tells me that we need to be developing leadership so that we're not totally dependent upon one person.
That's what I was gonna say, we should be praying for that.
Yes, we should, and working for that. Is developing leadership so the loss of one person doesn't destroy the congregation.
It's important that the legacy of the sound congregation be maintained.
Yeah.
Sadly, it's not happening.
And we see that all over the valley. It's not just here, but we see, all over the valley, congregations are losing population, losing their members. They're not replacing the people who die, and we're not building the leadership that we need to keep us going in the future. You guys know that I taught in college for over, I think it was 41 years. And during that time, there are outside accrediting agencies that accredit the programs to make sure they meet a certain minimum standard, so people are getting their money's worth when they go to college. And one of the things is especially true. There's an association of colleges and universities called North Central Association, and they accredit the whole institution around here, but there are also accrediting agencies that will accredit individual programs. There's an accrediting agency whose acronym is ABET, A-B-E-T, and that stands for the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology or something like that, okay? But the E-T in ABET is Engineering and Technology. And so they look very intently, whereas North Central looks at the entire institution. ABET looks very intently at the programs in engineering and technology that you have at your college or university. And one of the big things is that your program cannot be overly dependent on one individual. Okay, now in civil engineering has several subspecialties: structural engineering, highway engineering, environmental engineering. All those are part of the general civil engineering field. And so if you're going to have an accredited civil engineering program, you have to have at least 4 specialties represented. But you can't have one person who represents all 4 of those specialties. So they don't tell you how many faculty members you have to have, like nursing programs do, but you have to have people who can cover those specialties. And you can't be overly dependent on one individual. Why? Because if something happens to that one individual, and it doesn't have to be anything tragic, it could be they decide to go to California and get a job that pays twice as much. Cost of living is 3 times as much. You find that out once you get out there. But, the salaries will be higher if you go out to California to teach. And so you could leave and it not be a tragic situation for you personally. Now, if you die, that's a tragic situation for you, and it would be for your program if they were overly dependent upon you. And so they are very, very, very particular about telling you that you cannot be overly dependent on one individual. Church ought to be the same way. Because, people move away. They used to be, when this congregation was really big, because carbide was really strong in the valley, people would be transferred from here to Texas, or from Texas to here. Okay? And, you had to be ready for that. because, you know, a man or a woman who are supporting a family with their salaries from Union Carbide, it, you know, doesn't exist here anymore, but it used to be really, really big in the valley. If they tell you to go pick up and go to Texas, you pick up and go to Texas, or vice versa. And so your congregation can't be dependent on just one person. We've got to develop our leadership, because we're all going to die. I don't want to ruin your day, but we're all going to die. Okay, and so we need to be developing our leadership. And this is true with our women as well. We have got tremendous number of hardworking women in this congregation who do an awful lot. And we're not just dependent upon one person. And we need to keep that going. You older women need to involve the younger women into the programs in which you guys function. And, you know, that's a commandment, isn't it? You know what Paul told Timothy and Titus? You know, for the older women to teach the younger women. So we need to do that, and we need to develop our leadership. Okay? And Solomon several times has talked about eat, drinking, and being merry, right? Now, what's the one problem with that? How do we handle that? How does a Christian handle what Solomon told us? Well, one thing is we don't let eating, drinking, and being merry be the focus of our existence. There are people out in the world today whose whole existence is based on eating and drinking and being merry, having a good time. A lot of times to the detriment of their job. Okay? We need to keep it in focus. There's nothing wrong with us having an enjoyable time and enjoying the fruits of our labor, as long as we don't make it the primary focus of our life. Like the rich man, the other rich man that we talk about. Not the rich man and Lazarus, but the rich man that decided to pull down his barns and build bigger barns, because his barns were full and he still had stuff coming in from his croplands. And he said, my barns are full. I don't have any place to put all this stuff. What can I do? It didn't hit him in the head that, well, why don't you give it to the poor? You got plenty in your barns. Give that to the poor. No, I know what I'll do. I'll tear down those barns, build bigger barns. That's what my mom used to say to me, bigger barns, bigger barns. I said, Mom, I haven't torn down any. I just build more. But anyway, I'll tear down those barns, build bigger ones, fill them up, and then I'll take my ease, eat, drink, and be merry. And what God say to him? Thou fool, this very night your life is going to be required of you, and then who will those things be that you've provided? You're going to leave your heirs to fight over them. So we can't there's nothing wrong with eating and drinking and being merry. There's nothing wrong with getting together as a group and enjoying food, because generally when we do get together as a group, food's involved. But there's nothing wrong with that, as long as we don't make that the focus of our existence. You know, preachers will tell a story about the people that started a little life-saving station on the coast to help rescue people who were shipwrecked and stuff like that. And as it went on, then, you know, it got a little uncomfortable sitting out there waiting for somebody to holler for help, and so they built a little tent, and then the tent turned into a little structure, and the little structure turned into a little bit bigger structure. And before you knew it, they were spending more time partying than they were looking for people to save out in the surf. And the application that the preacher was drawing was, are we doing that? You know, are we so wrapped up in eating and drinking and being merry and providing a physical structure and making sure it's comfortable that we're not focused on preaching the gospel? And that's generally the point that the preacher was making when he told that story. Okay, so we've got to be rich toward God and not necessarily rich toward ourselves and just pleasing ourselves. Verse 16 and 17, running out of time. When I apply my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done upon the earth, for also there is that neither day nor night seeth sleep with his eyes, and I beheld all the work of God, that a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun, because though a man labor to seek it out, yet shall he not find it. Yea, farther, though a wise man think to know it, yet shall he not be able to find it. Now, that's the wording in that's a little confusing, but I think that what these last two verses are saying is man is not capable of understanding all of the works of God. We can't understand, what we can understand about God is what he has told us in his word. Now, we need to study his word so we can find out as much as we can about God, but we're never going to know everything there is to know about God. It goes back to one of my favorite verses, Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to God, but the things that have been revealed belong to us. Okay? Well, what that tells us is there are things that we're not going to know or understand, but we are going to understand enough to be saved. And that's the key, to live our life and to stand before God justified by Christ's blood. Okay? Now, a lot of what goes on in the world, I think, can be explained because man's a free moral agent. We look at Adam and Eve, they had perfection, and they messed it up by sinning. But I think probably a good scripture to look at in the New Testament to kind of sum up these verses we've been studying today is Romans 11. So if you got your Bibles, turn to Romans 11, and we'll look at verses 33 through 36, and that will bring us to pretty much to the end of class. Starting with verse 33. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments, and his ways past finding out. For who hath known the mind of the Lord? Or who hath been his counselor? Or who hath first given to him, and it shall be recompensed unto him again? For of him, and through him, and to him are all things, to whom be glory forever. Amen. So why don't we let that close chapter 8. Anybody have any comments or questions? We'll entertain those. We've got about 2 minutes left. Jimmy's frowning at me. Just your natural demeanor. Any questions or comments on chapter 8? Lord willing, whenever it's my turn to teach again, we'll start with chapter 9. I'll put next time on my notes at chapter 9. Next time. Whenever that is. Any comments? Questions? All right, it's about time for the last bell, so I'll wrap things up here. Do you have a question? No, I thought you was raising your hand. That shocked me. I appreciate all of y'all's comments over the last 3 months, because that helps me. Sometimes it throws me for a loop, but most times it helps me. Appreciate y'all.